All right. Today we're going to end up talking about Chapter 13, Conflict and Peacemaking, but let's take a quick talk about the short paper number 7, which will come out of this material. Describe the tragedy of the commons, including a description of one example from the text, okay? We'll talk about a few. When I say text, I mean either here or the actual physical textbook. Find an example of the tragedy of the commons from either your own life or from the news. Oh, it's pretty easy to find the tragedy in the commons in the news. Of course, you have to understand what we're talking about before you can really make sense of this statement. How might the tragedy of the commons be avoided? We'll definitely talk about a few cases of how to manage this. In fact, government regulation and things of this nature. So keep those in mind as we move along to Chapter 13, Conflict and Peacemaking, both the good and the bad, right? So, what is conflict? A conflict is a perceived incompatibility of actions or goals. We're going to come to some clear cases where people's goals aren't incompatible, but they believe they are, and therefore there's conflict. Peace is simply a condition marked by low levels of hostility, blah, 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 blah. Okay. I'm going to talk about traps first, is social dilemmas and traps. Before I can really do this, so I want to talk about very, very quickly, this is social psychology. That's what this course is, and therefore it's really referring to interactions with other people, how we interact with them. However, in addition to that, I know it's a little bit funky, but if we think of ourselves as existing at multiple points in time, then we can make reference to myself today, myself yesterday, myself tomorrow, or perhaps my present self, my future self, my past self. And we can talk about situations where we need to work with our future self. We need to, work, and so we can refer to our future self and our present self as though we're different entities and refer to a social relationship between the two. And some of this stuff I'm going to talk about, it sounds a little funky, but that's clearly what we got going on. Well, a social trap is a situation in which the conflicting parties, by each rationally pursuing its own self-interest, that is, either I'm pursuing my own self-interest and makes you suffer, or a situation where my present self is pursuing its self-interest and makes my future self suffer. Okay? And we'll talk about two of them, prisoner's dilemma and tragedy of the commons. A non-zero-sum game, I guess the easiest way to talk about that is to talk about a zero-sum game. A zero-sum game is a game such as poker with your friends in the garage. If you win $10, I lose $10. I mean, whatever. When people walk away from the table, there's a zero balance, right? It all balances out. But in a non-zero-sum game, it doesn't have to balance out to zero. Everybody can win. Everybody can lose, depending on how the game is played. And that's what prisoner's dilemma and tragedy of the commons are really about. So I'm going to talk about these traps a little bit. A trap is it occurs when we take potentially harmful courses of action, and a counter trap is when we fail to take an action which is beneficial. Okay? There are 5 kinds of traps, each with a counter trap. I'm going to kind of do these a little bit quickly. They're very interesting. A time delay trap. Momentary gratification clashes with long-term consequences. That is to say, what feels good to my present self is not good for my future self. Right? And so I often fail to think about my future self and simply give my present self what it wants. As a trap, we could think about something that's pleasant at the moment, like perhaps smoking if you're a smoker, but in the long run, your future self will pay. Or a counter trap where we avoid things that are unpleasant at the moment, like exercise or something, because my present self does not want to deal with it, even though my future self would be better off if I did so. We could talk about a similar notion like an ignorance trap, where we do something that feels pleasant at the moment without really knowing the consequences. You marry your wife, and then you find out later what she's really like. Just saying. It's very similar to this time delay trap, except in the time delay trap, you know it's wrong. In the ignorance trap, you just don't know. Okay? A counter trap, we avoid doing things unpleasant at the moment because we don't know, especially like when immunizations were first invented. People avoided them because they don't know. I guess nowadays with autism coming out, and this is even more prevalent. Investment traps, this is really just an economics thing. When we keep on spending money on something, we know it's wrong, but we do it because we already put money into it. And anybody that's got an older car knows this, that at some point you should just trash the car and start over. But you look at it and you go, but I just put on new tires, and I just put on, and I just put on. And so when the transmission drops, you're like, oh man, I just spent all that money. I might as well put the extra $3,000 into the transmission. But at that point, you ought to just drop the car. You ought to just get a new one. A counter trap is when we avoid starting something new, even though it would be good for us. Like when they shift to new versions of computer programs, people often stick blindly. I mean, my mother is the worst example. She still, and I don't even know how she gets it to work, she still uses WordPerfect. She will not switch over to a Microsoft product, even though she in some ways knows it's better. She'll just sticks to what she knows because there's too much pain involved in learning a new one. Deterioration traps, I don't know. I'll just leave that alone. But collective traps, and this is the most interesting. The pursuit of individual self-interest results in the adverse consequences for the collective. Oh my God. All right, here. We perform actions. Now all of a sudden we're talking about a trap here that truly, okay, all of the previous four were really traps between my present self and my future self. And so therefore they're not exactly social per se, but this is truly a social trap. Collective traps. The pursuit of an individual self-interest results in adverse consequences for the collective. Oh my God, I just had this. I just had this in my car. I'm coming up here to school, and I'm driving on Beach Street, and they got some construction going on at Beach Street and Belknap at this intersection, and left lane closed ahead, and everybody sees it, and there's a long line of traffic in the right lane, backed up because we're good people. But of course, some selfish little bastards have to go as far as they can in the left lane and then try to sneak into the right lane. Meanwhile, what they're doing is they're backing everybody up. They gained 3 minutes, but everybody else paid 5 to 10 seconds each. Every single person paid for their selfishness. Okay? A counter trap. We fail to do things which are difficult, even though it's actually better for the collective. And of course, this is when you walk your dog, who wants to pick up your dog's poop? I mean, come on, that's just nasty. But what happens if everybody just leaves their poop sitting there? All right, okay, you know what I mean. All right, so now we're on to the prisoner's dilemma. And this is a very interesting thing. I'm going to try to explain this. It's a game of trust. It's definitely a situation of a non-zero-sum game, okay? Clearly, there's 2 players in this game, and let's imagine the scenario. You've got two people, and in fact, it's like the way they write it. I don't know. I wrote it somewhere. Bonnie and Clyde, right? They arrest Bonnie and Clyde. They're fleeing the police, and they're running through cornfields, and they're busting up property on the way, and then they finally catch Bonnie and Clyde. They put them in separate rooms, and they basically remember now, they're going to tell each one the same story. So they say to Bonnie, Bonnie, we have this evidence of reckless driving and endangerment, okay? We can send you to jail for a year right now for it, okay? We have it. We really suspect that you were responsible for some bank robberies, you and Clyde, but, we don't exactly have the proof of that. But you know what? We definitely know that we got this reckless driving, and that's a year. Remember, they're telling Clyde the exact same thing. So now they're going to say to Bonnie, okay, if you confess, things can go better on you, okay? If you can confess, here's what's the deal. If you confess, let's say Bonnie is prisoner A, right? If you confess and Clyde doesn't confess, we'll be cool. We'll take that information. We'll be lenient on you. We'll let you go free. And Clyde is going to jail for 10 years. Bonnie's thinking, damn, I can go free if I confess? Wait a minute. What if I confess and Clyde confesses too? Well, if you both confess, you're both going to jail for 5 years. Okay. Then they say, okay, but what about if I don't confess? And what do they say? They say, you know what? It depends again what Clyde does. If Clyde doesn't confess, then you both, if you both don't confess, you both get 1 year in jail because, we have reckless endangerment and bad driving and stuff. But if Clyde does confess, you're screwed, okay? You're out of luck, okay? You're going to jail for 10 years. And so Bonnie's looking at it like this. If I confess, okay, since I can't control what Clyde's going to do, okay, if Clyde confesses, I can get either 5 years or 10 years. Wow, I think that 5 beats 10. If Clyde doesn't confess, I can get 0 year or 1 year. Wow, 0 beats 1, right? So why wouldn't Bonnie say, I'm going to confess? I'll get either 5 or, compared to 10, or I'll get 0 compared to 1. Either way, no matter what Clyde does, I'm better off by confessing. All right, we did it. We robbed all those banks, and that's the truth. But, of course, Clyde is hearing the same story, and, of course, you'd have to flip your brain around because Clyde has got the same scenario. And he finds out that Clyde's best interest, in his own selfish best interest, is to confess. So almost inevitably, they both confess. They both go to jail for 5 years, and the total amount of jail time is 10 years. If they had both kept their mouths shut, they both would have gotten a single 1 year in jail. If they would have but both of them are looking out for their own selfish best interest. And this is what conflict was about, right? They were both looking out for their own selfish best interest, and by doing so has created a situation which is worst for the collective, right? For them together. And so lawyers use this to set up confessions in a lot of situations, and it works very, very well. Okay, it's a very straightforward thing. Neither one trusts the other. They're worried, if whatever. I'm not going to get into it, but suffice it to say, I do my research. In fact, my dissertation and the research I do to this day involves a one-player prisoner's dilemma, a game where instead of it being Bonnie versus Clyde, it's your present self versus your future self. It's a very interesting game. Maybe some of you have played it because I've been using it for a long time as a research paradigm. In fact, there's part of that research. That's a lot of words. You read it some other day. But anyway, whatever. That was a paper I wrote back when I was in New York that really was the reason I got my first job, I think. All right, I'm going to have to stop there because I'm at 12 minutes and 40 seconds, and this is going to take longer than that.